Fine. Let's start. The universe is 13.8 billion years old, okay? Our civilization, the part where we wrote things down and built things that last, is about 10,000 years old. That's not even a rounding error on a cosmic timescale. That's basically this afternoon. Now here's the thing that should keep you up at night. If even one other civilization arose a billion years before us and lasted a million years, it's been dead for 999 million years. It rose. It built things. It looked at the sky and wondered what was out there, and then it was gone. Long before the first dinosaur set foot on Earth. Long before the oceans were the shape they are now. And we would have absolutely no way of knowing it ever existed. So that's the frame for everything we're about to talk about. We're not searching for aliens. We might be searching for gravestones. And the unsettling possibility, the one that runs underneath all of these theories, is that the graveyard is enormous, ancient, and completely silent. Number 10. The WOW signal. August 15th, 1977. 11:16 in the evening, local time. Ohio State University's Big Ear radio telescope is doing what it does every night, sweeping the sky, listening for anything that doesn't sound like the universe just going about its business. A volunteer astronomer named Jerry Eman is reviewing the computer printouts a few days later, and he sees something. A sequence of characters, 6EQUJ5, representing a signal of extraordinary intensity. It lasted 72 seconds, the full length of the observation window. It came from the direction of the constellation Sagittarius. It matched, almost perfectly, every predicted characteristic of a signal transmitted from somewhere outside our solar system. He circled it in red ink, and in the margin he wrote one word: wow. Now here's the thing. That signal has never been detected again. Not once. In nearly 50 years of follow-up searches, hundreds of attempts, different telescopes, better equipment, nothing. The sky in that direction is quiet, completely ordinary. Robert Dixon, the director of the Ohio State SETI program at the time, later said the signal's behavior, the way it tracked the telescope's beam as it swept across the sky, was very unlikely to be any kind of interference. He said it indicated intelligent origin, not extraterrestrial origin, to be precise, but something deliberate, something with a shape. The best current natural explanation, proposed in a 2024 study, is a rare maser-like flare from a neutral hydrogen cloud that was hit by a powerful cloud burst of radiation. It's plausible. Unusual, but plausible. The problem is no one has ever actually observed that event happening in that configuration before, so we have two options. Either the most promising candidate signal in 50 years of searching was a 1 in a billion cosmic coincidence, or it was something that broadcast once, and only once, and we happened to be pointing the right piece of metal at the right piece of sky for 72 seconds in the summer of 1977, and then it was gone. Neither answer is especially comforting. Number 9. Tabby's star. In 2015, citizen scientists going through data from the Kepler Space Telescope found something that didn't fit. A star about 1,470 light-years away, cataloged as KIC 8462852, but most people call it Tabby's star, was dimming. Not just dimming. Dimming strangely, irregularly, by as much as 22% in some observations. No planet passes in front of a star and blocks 22% of its light. Planets block about 1%, maybe 2% for a very large one. 22 is a completely different category. Jason Wright, an astronomer at Penn State, went on record raising a possibility that almost never gets raised in a peer-reviewed context. He suggested the dimming pattern was consistent with a partially constructed Dyson swarm, a collection of megastructures built around a star by an advanced civilization to harvest its energy. He was careful about it. He said aliens should always be the very last hypothesis you consider. And then he said, we've considered the other ones. The megastructure hypothesis was eventually ruled out. Follow-up observations in 2018, involving more than 200 researchers and a Kickstarter campaign that raised over $100,000, found that the dimming was wavelength-dependent, consistent with fine dust, not a solid or metallic structure, so not alien megastructures. But here's the thing. Nobody knows what's producing the dust. Nobody knows what body was destroyed to generate it. Nobody knows why it keeps replenishing. And there's a longer-term secular dimming of the star over decades that nobody has a clean explanation for either. The alien answer is gone. The real answer isn't here yet. Just this strange, flickering star 1,400 light-years away, doing something we don't quite understand, for reasons we haven't found. Number 8. BLC-1, the signal that almost was, April 29, 2019. The Parkes Muriang radio telescope in Australia is pointed at Proxima Centauri, the closest star to our Sun, 4.24 light-years away. It's part of a breakthrough. Listen, Observing Run, a $100 million initiative to search for signs of technological life beyond Earth. Buried in the data is a signal at 982 megahertz. Narrowband, drifting in frequency at exactly the rate you'd expect from a transmitter orbiting within the Proxima Centauri system. Not matching any known interference source. Not in any catalog. The signal appears intermittently, in a pattern consistent with a transmitter being occulted, blocked and unblocked by a moving object, the way a planet moves. Every automated filter built to rule out fake signals let this one through. The team named it BLC-1, Breakthrough Listen Candidate 1. For several months, a small group of scientists knew about a signal they couldn't explain, coming from the direction of the nearest star that behaved exactly like an extraterrestrial transmission. They eventually concluded it was human-made interference. Specifically, an unusual kind called an intermodulation product, where two separate signals from terrestrial sources interact in a way that creates a ghost signal with misleading properties. When they looked harder, they found dozens of similar signals at related frequencies, human noise doing something weird and deceptive. And that's the honest ending. But Sophia Sheikh, who led the analysis, put something in the paper that sticks with you. She said BLC-1 was the first signal to ever fully fool their search algorithm. It required a completely new verification framework to rule out, and she ended by saying, "It won't be the last. The next candidate is coming, and it'll be harder to dismiss." Number 7. Gamma ray bursts the galactic lawnmower. Imagine the most powerful explosion in the observable universe. Not a supernova. Those are relatively tame by comparison. A gamma ray burst. A focused beam of high-energy radiation that fires across entire galaxies, lasting anywhere from milliseconds to several minutes, carrying more energy than the sun will emit in its entire 10 billion-year lifetime. If one fired within a few thousand light-years of a planet with a biosphere, it would strip the ozone layer, flood the surface with ultraviolet radiation, and collapse the food chain. Not immediately, just thoroughly. Here's where it gets relevant to us. A 2014 study published in Physical Review Letters by researchers Jimenez and Pirin found that gamma-ray bursts are frequent enough in roughly 90% of galaxies to periodically sterilize planetary systems across vast regions. And the Milky Way is not exempt. Earth has almost certainly been hit by at least one lethal burst over its history. One leading candidate is the Ordovician mass extinction, 440 million years ago, when about 85% of all species on Earth went extinct. The cause has never been definitively established. A gamma-ray burst from a few thousand light-years away fits the evidence. Earth survives partly by geography. We sit about 28,000 light-years from the galactic center in what researchers have called the galactic suburbs. Far enough out that the burst rate is lower. Far enough that some hits are survivable. Halve that distance and Earth is a dead rock. Sterile. Probably has been for billions of years. Now think about what that means for the history of intelligence in the Milky Way. The galactic center has more stars, older stars, and more time. Statistically, it should be the most likely place for advanced civilizations to have emerged. And it's also the most dangerous place in the galaxy to live. Any civilization that rose near the center may have been reset, again and again. Not by war, not by their own choices. Just by the cosmos randomly firing a beam of hard radiation across the neighborhood every few million years. The universe doesn't need a reason. It just does it. Number 6. The Milky Way's civilizational peak, 5 billion years ago. In 2020, a team of researchers published a statistical study mapping the history of civilizational potential in our galaxy. They fed in what we know about star formation rates, planet formation probabilities, supernova exposure levels, and the estimated probability of intelligent life arising and then self-annihilating. Then they asked, if intelligent civilizations have been arising and dying throughout the Milky Way's history, when was the peak? The answer was roughly 8 billion years after the galaxy formed, meaning about 5 billion years before us. The hotspot was centered approximately 13,000 light-years closer to the galactic core than Earth. A separate 2016 study found that about 77% of potentially habitable star systems are older than the Sun by an average of 3.13 billion years. Sit with that for a second. 3 billion years. The entire history of complex life on Earth is about 600 million years. 3 billion is 5 times that. Civilizations that had a 3 billion year head start on us. What would they have built? What would they have become? And where did they go? The models are not optimistic. Given enough time, the probability of self-annihilation approaches certainty. The same study notes that most of the civilizations that existed during that peak era have likely destroyed themselves. The ones that are still active are probably young, newcomers, like us, which means we are not pioneers, we are not the vanguard of some great civilizational age. We showed up billions of years into a story that mostly already happened, in a quiet corner of the galaxy where the action used to be, and most of the actors are gone. We didn't miss the party, we arrived at the ruins. Number 5. The Berserker Hypothesis. Most theories about why the galaxy is silent assume civilizations die by their own hand war, climate collapse, a technology they couldn't control. The Berserker Hypothesis proposes something considerably more unsettling. Maybe they didn't die on their own. Maybe something came for them. The concept, named after Fred Saberhagen's science fiction series from the 1960s, involves self-replicating robotic probes. Not probes built by a currently living civilization, probes built by a civilization that may no longer exist. Machines that were programmed to do one thing: find emerging technological life and eliminate it before it can become a threat. And because they self-replicate, building new copies of themselves from the resources of each system they pass through, they don't need a master, they just need time. The scientific engagement with this idea is more serious than you might expect. In 2013, Anders Sandberg and Stuart Armstrong at the Future of Humanity Institute at Oxford ran an analysis. They found that any Berserker probe network capable of destroying other civilizations would, given the timescales involved, have almost certainly reached Earth already. So the logic splits into 2 uncomfortable branches. Either Berserker probes don't exist, in which case the silence has to be explained some other way, or they do exist, and Earth has somehow been skipped, missed, spared. And if they exist and we've been spared, the question of why is not a comforting one to sit with. What makes Earth special? What makes us worth leaving alone? The silence has always felt like an absence. The Berserker Hypothesis suggests it might feel more like being watched. Number 4. The Silurian Hypothesis. In 2018, Gavin Schmidt, the director of NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies, and Adam Frank, an astrophysicist at the University of Rochester, published a paper in the International Journal of Astrobiology. The paper had a question as its title: would it be possible to detect an industrial civilization in the geological record? They named it the Silurian Hypothesis, after a race of intelligent reptiles from an old British science fiction series that supposedly evolved on Earth before humans. They were clear from the start. They were not arguing that a prior civilization existed. They were asking something more fundamental. If one had, would we know? Their answer was essentially no. Here's why. The entire Anthropocene, every factory, every city, every road, every nuclear test, every satellite, every piece of plastic ever manufactured will compress in the geological record into a layer a few centimeters thick. The chemical signals degrade. The synthetic compounds break down. Within roughly 50 million years, most of the physical signature of human industrial civilization becomes difficult to distinguish from naturally occurring geological events. Complex life has existed on Earth's land surface for 400 million years. The Carboniferous period around 350 million years ago already had enough buried carbon to theoretically fuel an industrial civilization. There have been at least 5 major mass extinction events in that time period, each of which creates exactly the kind of anomalous geological signature that a collapsed civilization might also produce. Schmidt and Frank looked at one particular event, the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, 56 million years ago, a sudden, massive injection of carbon into the atmosphere that caused global temperatures to spike by 5 to 8 degrees Celsius. The cause is still debated. Volcanism is the leading candidate. But the carbon isotope signature of the PETM looks, in some respects, like what the Anthropocene layer will look like in 50 million years. They are not saying a prior civilization caused the PETM. They are saying we should not be entirely certain it didn't. The ground beneath our feet has been here for 400 million years. We've been reading it for about 200. And the paper's most unsettling conclusion is quiet and precise. If we are not specifically looking for signs of a prior industrial civilization, we will almost certainly not see them, even if they're there. Number 3. Directed Panspermia, Children of the Dead. Francis Crick discovered the double helix structure of DNA in 1953. He shared the Nobel Prize for it in 1962. He was one of the most rigorous molecular biologists who ever lived, not someone inclined towards speculation for its own sake. In 1973, Crick and his colleague Leslie Orgel published a paper in the journal Icarus. The paper was called Directed Panspermia. Its central argument was this: life on Earth may have been deliberately seeded here by an extraterrestrial civilization, one that was possibly facing extinction, and chose to preserve its genetic legacy by sending microorganisms outward into the universe on spacecraft, aimed at habitable worlds. Crick's reasoning was biochemical. He was troubled by the universality of the genetic code. Every living thing on Earth, every bacterium, every plant, every animal, every human being uses the same code. The same arbitrary assignments of triplet sequences of nucleotides to specific amino acids. The code is not the simplest possible code. It's not particularly elegant by design standards, but it is absolutely universal, and the probability of that universality arising by chance through independent origin events on Earth struck Crick as implausibly low. He first presented the hypothesis at a conference on extraterrestrial intelligence in Soviet Armenia in 1971, organized by Carl Sagan. He continued to advocate for it until at least 1988, not as established truth, but as a serious scientific possibility that deserved investigation. James Watson was skeptical. Leslie Orgel eventually distanced himself from the idea. Crick did not. If he was right, the implications are not just scientific. They're personal, in the deepest possible sense. Every living thing on Earth would be the biological continuation of a civilization that died somewhere else, for reasons we don't know, on a timeline we can't see. The genetic code inside every cell of your body would be the last message sent by someone who knew they weren't going to make it. We might not be the origin story, we might be the epilogue, and if that's what we are, a message in a bottle, sent across the void by a dying people into the only kind of future they could reach, then maybe the right way to think about what we find when we look up at the sky is not a question about who's out there. Maybe it's gratitude for the ones who sent us. Number 2. Observational signatures of dead civilizations. What would we actually see? In 2015, 3 astrobiologists, Adam Stevens at the Open University, Duncan Forgan at the University of St. Andrews, D.A.D.I.S., and Jack O'Malley James at Cornell's Carl Sagan Institute, published a paper in the International Journal of Astrobiology that asks what is possibly the most practical and sobering question in the entire field. If a technological civilization destroyed itself, what would it look like from here? What would we actually be able to detect? They mapped out the scenarios: nuclear war, runaway climate change, biological catastrophe, nanotechnology accident. For each one, they worked out what the observable signature would be: changes in atmospheric chemistry, spectral anomalies detectable in the light of a distant planet, and then they worked out how long that signature would last before fading below any telescope's detection threshold. A nuclear war leaves a detectable atmospheric signature. That signature decays in roughly 100 years. 100 years. In cosmic terms, that is nothing. That is less than nothing. The light from a planet 1,000 light-years away takes 1,000 years to reach us. By the time we could theoretically see the signature of a nuclear exchange on a planet 1,000 light-years from Earth, the signature would have been gone for 900 years. We'd be looking at clean sky, wondering. Biological and chemical collapse scenarios leave even less. A nanotechnology accident might leave almost no atmospheric trace at all. The longest-lasting signature in most models is runaway greenhouse warming from fossil fuel combustion, the thing that would look most like us. And even that, given enough time, either stabilizes or tips over into something that looks like a naturally occurring climate event. The paper introduces a phrase that doesn't let go once you've heard it: the communication lifetime of a civilization. The window during which its signals are detectable. Not its lifespan. Just the window in which anything it did is visible to an observer at interstellar distances. For most catastrophic scenarios, that window is decades to centuries. The Milky Way is 100,000 light-years across. The probability of the right telescope being pointed at the right planet during that exact window without even knowing which planet to look at approaches 0. We could be surrounded by the remnants of hundreds of civilizations. Their planets are still out there, orbiting their stars, silent and unremarkable. The atmospheres have long since returned to equilibrium. The ruins, if they lasted, are buried. The signals stopped long before our telescopes existed. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. But here, it's something worse. The absence of evidence might simply be what the evidence looks like after it's gone. Number 1. The Great Filter behind us, or ahead? In August of 1996, an economist named Robin Hanson published an essay on his website. Not in a journal, not in a book, on a personal website in the early days of the internet. The essay was called "The Great Filter, Are We Almost Past It?" It has become one of the most cited and discussed frameworks in astrobiology, philosophy of science, and existential risk research. And it started from one observation. The universe near us appears to be dead. Not just quiet dead. Hanson's argument is simple. For spacefaring civilizations to be absent from a universe this old and this large, something must be stopping them. The path from lifeless matter to a civilization that can colonize the stars involves many steps. Abiogenesis, single-celled life, complex cells, multicellular life, sexual reproduction, animal intelligence, tool use, language, industry, space travel, and on. At least one of those steps, maybe more, must be so improbable that it acts as a filter. Almost nothing gets through. Hence, the Great Filter. The question Hanson posed, and that has haunted every serious thinker who has engaged with it since, is this: where is the filter? Is it behind us or ahead? If the filter is behind us, we're the lucky ones. The hardest step may be abiogenesis, maybe the jump from simple cells to complex ones, maybe something we haven't identified is already in our past. We are the rare survivors in a graveyard universe. That's uncomfortable, but it's also a kind of good news. We made it through. If the filter is ahead, then the reason we see no other civilizations is that none of them survived to become visible. Something awaits every civilization that reaches our level, something that ends them. A technology they can't control. A resource war they can't survive. A cascade they can't stop. And we are approaching it without knowing where it is or what it looks like. Here's the detail that makes this whole framework feel like a physical weight. Finding primitive life on Mars would be, for most people, the most exciting scientific discovery in history. Proof that life arises wherever conditions allow. Vindication that we're not alone. The photograph on the front page of every newspaper in the world. And according to the logic of the Great Filter, it might be the worst news our civilization has ever received. Because if life emerged independently on Mars, even just microbial life, even just ancient fossilized traces, it means the early steps of the filter are easy. Abiogenesis is common. Life happens, which means the filter isn't there, which means it's somewhere else. Somewhere between where we are now and where we'd need to be to leave a permanent mark on the galaxy. Somewhere in our future, not our past. Every rover we send to Mars is, in a very precise and uncomfortable sense, a test we should hope to fail. Hanson wrote his essay 29 years ago. We are now closer to Mars than we've ever been. We have better instruments. We are looking harder. And every year that passes without a confirmed biosignature discovery on Mars, on Enceladus, on Europa, anywhere is another year of ambiguous relief. The universe is 13.8 billion years old. The sky is enormous and ancient and completely quiet. And somewhere in that quiet, either we pass the hard part without knowing it, and we are improbably, miraculously here, or the hard part is still ahead of us, and every civilization before us ran into it, and the silence is the sound of them not making it through. We don't know which one it is. We don't have enough information to know, and that is not a comfortable thing to sit with. But it is honest, and it is the question. Where is everybody? Maybe they're gone, maybe they never made it as far as we have, maybe they made it further and burned out. Maybe the Great Filter swallowed them, one by one, in different ways, on different timescales, leaving no trace that any telescope we build will ever be able to see. Maybe the universe is full of quiet planets where something started and then stopped, and the stars shine on them the same way they shine on everything else, completely indifferent to what was there. What was almost there, what tried and didn't make it. Or maybe we're early, maybe the filter is behind us. Maybe the reason the universe is silent is that the window between emerging and collapsing is short, and we are one of the first to be awake at the same time as our instruments. And billions of years from now, something else will look at the sky and wonder where everybody went, and they'll do the math, and they'll realize they're late, and they'll figure out that the galaxy's civilizational peak was long before they arrived. And then they'll feel exactly the way we feel right now. Thank you for watching and sticking till the end. We've got plenty more videos coming in the future. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss them. See you in the next one.